on December 30th, 2021. Okay, now the recording started. It is 11:02 on December 30th, 2021. This is a work session to discuss valuation for properties for next year. Madam, do we need a roll call, Madam Clerk?
Yes, please.
Let's do the roll. It's a work session.
Ms. Allard? Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Ms. LaFrance? Mr. Presberdia?
Here.
Peterson?
Present.
Quinn Davidson?
Here.
Mr. Rivera? Mr. Waddleton?
Here.
And Ms. Zalatel?
Here.
Thank you.
All right. I had seen Mr. Gadamus earlier in the queue. I'm not sure if he's here. Otherwise, who from the administration is prepared to engage with this? Oh, hi there, Jack.
Yeah, through the chair, Mr. Constant. This is I'm Jack, so I am here to present the annual report for this year for 2022.
All right, you have the floor.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Constant, and thank you for everybody for your time here. What I'll do is I'll share my screen, and I believe we also I think I sent it yesterday, so hopefully you also had at least an electronic copy. And let me, since I'm working on a one-screen laptop, I'll move that down here. So my name is, again, Jack Adamus. I'm the municipal assessor. I'm going to be leaving here shortly with the municipality, so I won't be too much longer. But if you do have any questions or anything during this, we, Property Appraisal, will be happy to follow up with those questions. So I will take those. So we do this every year. And so really just looking at what the 2022 values did, if I can do this, what the 2022 values did, and go from there. So this slide here, generally what I like to show here is just really what we do. At the bottom, you can see we have exemptions and valuation in blue. Year round, we administer exemptions. And also year-round, we inspect property every 6 years. We are required to go ahead and physically inspect the property to see if there's any big significant changes or anything like that. It is very helpful for us to maximize our detailed, oriented, and accuracy. January 1st, that's when all taxable property is assessed. That does kick off a series of dates, which we're going into very quickly here, which is the appeal season. That happens about mid-January, and we end on or before June 1. Then we do kick off our valuation analysis, which is really valuing property for the following year. And then finally, we do pick up new construction towards the end of the year. Again, we want to be mindful of that January 1 snapshot. Looking at total taxable value here in this slide. So what this is looking at is spanning 1980 all the way to 2022 in tax year, in billions, in nominal dollars here. You can see here that things are kind of relatively flat there for 2018, 19, 20, 21. But you can see there's a big jump this year. We actually had about a 5.1% increase in our total taxable value for this year. Be mindful here also too, the personal property, the red, personal property right now is reflecting tax year 2021 values. And so that will be happening throughout the entire presentation. We won't know tax year 2022 values for personal property until later this year. So looking at this chart here, I got two pie charts. This is just going to be a little bit more of a detailed breakdown. On the left here, this is the total value. So total value for Anchorage, $48.8 billion, comprised mostly of residential, 59%, commercial, 21%, personal property, 6%, and then the two yellow pie slices, those are your fully exempt property. Government at 11%, and then your non-government, which is your churches and charitable. Also, just wanted to let everybody know too that the pie chart on the left does include also your partial exemptions, for example, your residential exemption. Now, if you take a look at the pie on the right, now we have removed all exemptions, partial and full exemptions, and we're left with the total taxable value, which is basically the how the cost of government gets divvied up for property tax. Residential 65, commercial 28, and personal property 7%. What is interesting is I've been doing this chart for several years now, and it has changed a little bit. Back in 2019, the residential was about 61%, so it's jumped up about 4% of the total share. Commercial went down about 3 points. It was back in 2019 about 31%. And personal property only dropped about 1 point from 8 to 7. So that is really interesting. I mean, I'll be showing here in a little bit too how the change all these devils in the details. So the change, residential is going up this year, commercial is going down slightly. A little bit more in detail here though, so that pie chart that you just saw on your right, this is a little bit more of a breakdown of it. Again, is that 65, 28, 7% distribution. Single family, you can see here, the big story of this slide is really single family. That's the predominant value for Anchorage. We're really a single family home place. If you look at commercial, we got industrial, a little over $3 billion. And it's a little bit, more distributed between office, industrial, everything else. And then finally, personal property, we have businesses by far the majority of the value. We have oil and gas and the mobile homes. Mobile homes is a very small sliver, and I want everyone to know that mobile homes for tax year 2022, so this coming year, mobile homes personally owned on mobile home parks, those will be going exempt for the personal use. So that was something that happened and will be coming this year. Now, exemptions. Exemptions is something about a quarter of our total value is exempt. So taking a look at it, we got two broad categories here. We got mandatory, which is your state statute. That's what the state requires us to do. Senior disabled vet, that's the first $150,000 off if you qualify for those. 2.8, almost $2.9 billion. That has really been increasing the last several years. I mean, we're seeing on average year over year the last several years 5% at a minimum. So very interesting there. The next then, municipality, education, federal, state. So those are all your government exempt properties. And then you have your more non-government fully exempt property, churches, charitable, nonprofits. At the bottom, we have the biggest one by far that for the optional, which is what we as a municipality chose to adopt, is that residential at 20% up to $50,000. And that residential, what we saw this last year, about a 2.25 last year to about a $2.31 billion increase this year. So about 2.5%. So not anything near what we saw for the increase of the senior disabled vet. The other thing that we've been doing with exemptions is for the last couple of years, we have been doing a exemption review process. Our goal with this is to ensure that property owners who qualify for an exemption receive it, and property owners who don't qualify don't receive it. And so we have basically an overly simplistic four-step process here. We start with comparing the PFD. And so our data set, if, for example, maybe the mailing address doesn't look like things are really matching up and we're scratching our head a little bit, we will go ahead and contact that property owner. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they do or don't qualify for exemption, but it can be a good starting base. So we will contact that property owner. Then we'll go on to the step 3, where we work with that property owner to verify the eligibility. And then finally, we do at some point have to make a determination. And so this process takes quite a long time. Our goal is to not surprise property owners with this. at a minimum, this will be a 3-month process, and it can sometimes take even longer. So, and I think there was a question. I don't know if Mr. Constant, you want to pause for that, or if I should just keep going.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and Mr. Weddleton has the floor. Ms. Allard arrived at 11:10 a.m.
Yeah, thanks. So Jack, rolling back to page 6, a couple of questions. One, we have, so municipality, is that municipal buildings? And then education, is that all ASD? And then on economic development, there's 7 million. And I assume that's, things like at downtown where we have, you get exemption if you add residential, Debenhams property. And if that's the case, it seems low, actually. Not that I have reason to think it's wrong, but my guess would have been more.
Yeah, good. Yeah, through the chair too, Littleton. Great questions. Education, I believe, is all going to be largely, it's going to be largely ASD. There may be some other government education in there. I don't know if the college is going to be under education or under state. That would be a good question. I don't know right now. We also do have the charter school at the bottom there. Now, your other question, the economic development, that's going to be a very specific. That's largely right now under the 12.35 economic, which is going to be either your economic development properties, so anything like new construction, or that's going to be your deteriorated property that can be. So I know that there's been a couple that just recently got passed. There's, like, for example, the Key Bank that recently got passed for deteriorated property. Right now that is still being under construction, so that number's not going to be showing up. I believe that 7 million may be span Alaska. So hopefully that answered your question.
Anything else?
Well, now you gave me a question. Span Alaska.
Okay.
What's going on there?
What's that?
So Span Alaska, so the shipping company?
Yeah, they a couple of years ago, through the ordinance, that they applied for a economic development exemption for their property, and that was reviewed and was ultimately adopted and approved. And I can later give you an AM and the numbers if you are curious.
All right, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions, kind of back to the education and the distinction between education and charter schools. Why are charter schools actually separated out? Is that just so we have, the specific ability to make that distinction, or is there an actual reason for charter schools to have to be considered something separate from the education group?
Yeah, I think it's more of a legal question, so I'm not able to answer that specifically right now, but I believe there are some charter schools that are not ran by a government. And so I don't believe then they're automatically de facto under an education for that. Because there can be some schools that are for profit, for example. And so I think that the charter schools might be kind of in between. And again, because we got mandatory, which is the state statute, and the optional, which we chose to adopt, there is that specific distinction between the charter and the education. So unfortunately, I'm not able to give you a lot of detail on what encompasses education and how the hairs get split between a state statute required education exemption versus what we chose to adopt, the optional charter school.
Okay, if I might, Mr. Chair, just kind of.
Yep, you said you have a couple. Go ahead.
Thank you. I guess it could be a problem with the terminology, because charter schools are actually authorized through the state by each individual school district. So charter school has a specific meaning. and it's very separate from private schools. So that's kind of why I'm also asking what we're really looking at when we're talking about charter schools. So anyway, that might be a distinction that maybe needs better definitions in the future so that we really do know what we're talking about. But anyway, that's, kind of neither here nor there at this point, but something to consider. But one more question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Just in terms of who's eligible for exemptions and how you come up with the figures, are all of these basically self-reporting? I certainly understand that somebody that's a disabled vet, they're going to put in an application. Even a senior is going to put in an application for an exemption. But all of these others, the federal, whatever other organizations are listed here, are those different organizations and groups applying for an exemption, or are some of these automatic that the municipality just already considers them to be eligible, therefore they are? So could you speak just a little bit to how these all get categorized into these different categories and how they are actually considered, how they actually get the exemption? Thanks.
Right. Yeah. Good question through the chair. So in general, for our practice, if it is a government entity that's pretty straightforward, we generally will exempt it right away. But a lot of these, we may not know what they are really doing. And so generally what I say is when you look at exemptions, it's going to be ownership and the use. And if you look at those two, you're going to be about 90% there. So for example, a church, they would need to fill out a request for an exemption. So they would have to fill out the form and request that exemption. We would take a look at that. We would look at the criteria of what they're applying for, and then look at what the state statute is requiring, and make a determination ultimately on there. So again, really it's ownership and use. And if you don't apply, we're not going to de facto give it to you just because you're a church. And again, I'm just picking on a church, but it can go for anything. Could be a charitable, could be that nonprofit hospital, you name it. So hopefully that maybe gives you, from a high level, a little bit more clarity on one, that you have to apply, and then two, how that is determined.
Okay, so just for actual clarification, then everybody should be applying. There's nothing that says the municipality automatically deems something eligible for exemption. Or did I totally miss what you were explaining?
No, that pretty much, that's you're pretty much spot on.
Except, of course, for government properties, but Mr. Gates.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a comment about the charter schools and their exemption. I think that in many instances, the real property is owned by someone else and maybe leased to a charter school. Not all of them. Sometimes charter schools, the group owns the property, or it's the school district's property. But I think that sort of is factors into the reason why they have a category of their own. If it's a leasehold, the owner of the property may be just earning profit from the lease payments and things like that. So that's one of the circumstances that sort of might drive some of the factors in deciding how to do these categories. But, of course, Mr. Gadamis cannot correct me, but I thought that was helpful information.
Yeah, through the chair, Mr. Gates, that is very helpful. And that does ring a bell with me that, yeah, I think there are some of those that I don't know if that's the only distinction, and I don't unfortunately have the entire code memorized. So that's one that I haven't really been intimately involved with.
All right, so why don't we proceed with the presentation? Okay.
The next slide here that I want to talk about quickly is the computer-assisted mass appraisal upgrade project. So we've talked about this with you multiple times through the assembly. We did approve it back in 2017. We did start this in kind of halfway through 2019. We have been working with the Tyler Technologies. So they are formerly CLT, Coltler Trumbull, which is our current system that we're on now. We are right now in the build and validate. We're ending that, so we've largely got the system built. We have mostly done the validation to make sure that most of that is working. So we'll be moving into the early part of next, well, right now, we're moving into the testing and training phase of things. So we have been doing some training already with our staff, kind of a higher level with the system, but we'll be getting very detailed here very shortly in the testing and training, which ultimately we will be going live. So that's very encouraging. We'll be doing that here, early part of next year. As far as values, new construction and assessed values is really what I want to talk about next. I want to start off really with the taxable new construction. So this chart here you're looking at is spanning from 2006 all the way to this current tax year. This is adjusted for inflation here. And one of the big highlights here you can see here is things have been trending downward for several years, and we really did uptick this last year. We're up about, I believe, 29%, if my memory serves me correct. We'll go on to the next slide and be a little bit more specific with that. So residential, we did uptick about 23% from last year. Commercial was a significant increase, up 51%. So ultimately, this is a good news for Anchorage, in my opinion. And commercial for sure was the one. There were a couple of projects with that. We had a medical surgical center, we had a senior housing project, and we had a low-income housing tax credit apartment as well. So those three right there accounted for about half of the commercial activity. When you look at the property summary overall, which does include that new construction, you can see number of accounts there, 110,000. That does include personal property, which is accounts, but the other ones are going to be your parcels. Total value, again, 48.8 billion. We're up 4.5%, as I alluded to. Total taxable value, 36.7. So let's get into detail a little bit more. We'll talk residential, we'll talk commercial, and a little bit about personal property, and then just the coming months of what to expect. Residential, really at the end of the day, this is where the bulk, why we are increasing our total taxable value of slightly over 5%. The big reason here is the single family homes. You can see up 8.6%, duplex, triplex up almost 8%. Condos are up not as much, but they're still up significantly at 5%. And this, we also did vacant land, you can see, was pretty flat this last year. At the bottom here, you can see by assembly district what the average change is. And for the most part, things are reasonably within line. Midtown, you can see, is going to be the highest. South Anchorage, 7.6%. But that also does include Girdwood, which is going up double digits. I believe 15-ish%. So they're very they're up quite a bit. So the next thing we have is residential data, and so this is really very helpful for putting out tax rolls. We do track listings. We don't directly value using listings, but they do certainly help us. 1,366 that we had entered in this last year. The number of sales that occurred this last year, whether we knew about them or not, as we are non-disclosure, was nearing 3,000. And of that, we had 562 disclosed to us, a little under 20%, which is a little less than a typical year. So that 2957 for the single family homes.
Jack,
Oh, go ahead.
If you don't mind, before you go, Ms. Alto had a question on the previous
Oh,
slide.
I'm sorry, I must have missed that.
Nope.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Gadamus. I wanted to talk a little bit about the increase in valuation. I think one more slide before that, actually. The percent change. How can you kind of put this in a perspective of how this, and maybe it's not you that I should be asking, relates to the overall affordability of housing within the Anchorage area? I think we heard quite acutely in the past year about the unattainability of a lot of housing based on the fact that it's expensive and and so if the expense goes up, based on market changes, but then it also goes up based on the taxable value, I mean, we're just driving up. And are we expected that it should go up every year? Do we ever see it go down? And is that more a relational figure of supply and demand or something else? I guess I'm kind of wanting to get a little bit behind these numbers as to what drives these percentage changes.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, overly simplistic through the chair to Zalatel. We're really reporters. We're not really forecasters. And so what we've been seeing with this has been significant increases. As far as affordability goes, that is something that's certainly out of my expertise. I'm sure I could talk about anecdotes all the time, including my own personal anecdotes and finances with everything. But each person is comfortable with what they're willing to do. I think one of the things to be mindful of with respect to the notion of affordability is right now money is cheap. So sure, maybe perhaps that the home prices are nominally increasing, right? 8%. I think the MLS was about 7% average increase for this last year. So, we might be playing a little bit catch up from last year. That being said, though, when you look at your average monthly payment, if you include a relatively low interest rate, things might not be black and dire, so to speak, with that. But yeah, what I have been hearing is that things are strong right now with respect to the residential market. I mean, there's high demand. Inventory's been relatively low. To me, it seems like there's a lot of anecdotes where people just want more space right now during this interesting uncharted times we're in.
So,
Jack, I'm going to jump in briefly. I think that's not actually an accurate assessment of what's happening. I think the accurate assessment of what's happening is many people are moving into more space. Many people are downsizing. What's happening in the market because of COVID is people are right sizing. And so those shifts are across the board, not just up. But that's real estate stuff, not valuation.
can I ask a follow-up on the valuation?
Go ahead, Meg.
Thank you. So percentages are going up. Do we ever, I haven't been at this long enough to have the long view on this. Do they ever go down? And do you know when the last time we saw residential value change go from the assessment perspective downward?
Yeah, through the chair to Zalto. So I think it was several years ago, we did see a softening in the residential market that we did push values down a little bit. But overall, the trend has been going up. I don't know, comparing it to the rate of inflation, I can't tell you offhand if it's been outpacing the rate of inflation or not, because that's certainly something to consider as well. Not just the nominal dollars, but the inflation. But yeah, overall, though, it has been undoubtedly increasing. And if you would go back to that original slide there, the total valuation, go really quick here. I mean, obviously the blue is including commercial too, but you can see there, 2018, there was a downtick in value. We've been a little bit flat, and then we had this big jump this year in 2022. And the big jump is residential.
Thanks for that. It would be really interesting to know it as it relates to the rate of inflation, just so that we have a kind of a barometer. But I appreciate that. Thanks for the answer.
Yeah, thank you. Moving on to our ratios here. The top one is looking at our average assessed value of listings divided by the average list price. 91% you can see there. Again, we don't use listings to value the real estate, but it does help us to give a kind of a gauge of where we're at with everything. The middle one is our bread and butter, the average assessed value of disclosed sales divided by the average sale price. Right there, 95, 96% is our target goal. And then the bottom one is just more of an interesting kind of metric that we use. Average assessed value of single family home divided by the MLS average sale price, and we're at about 94% from there. When we look at commercial property, this is where the values are actually going the other direction. The only one that is, well, there are a couple exceptions to that. One's the housing in the commercial sector, but the other one is land. Land, we did increase last year by about 2%, and we were being a little cautious with that, with the expectation that we would increasing it in 2022 if we felt warranted, and sure enough, we did increase it a little bit more there. Industrial has been relatively a robust market for the last couple of years, but we did look, and a small softening was warranted. So your fourplexes, your apartments there, those are your two that are doing pretty good. Fourplex up 1.5%. A lot of kind of small investors with favorable financing is doing making that market pretty attractive. With respect to offices, what we've been seeing with offices is a softening down 2.5%. Rents seem to be relatively stable, or the face of it, the surface asking rents are, but there seems to be a lot of concessions kind of in the back side of it, or behind the scenes. And we're also seeing a fair amount of Class A office space still on the market. Apartments, I briefly talked about that a little bit. Retail down almost 4.5%. We're still seeing that trend continuing, where we're seeing the shift from in-store to the internet for sales. And then finally, hotels were down almost 10%. Partly some of this is while we have been seeing an increase in room revenue, one of the things that we have been seeing is still a reduction in your overall bottom line for these hotels. So things like your full service, for example, we just haven't seen people coming to the restaurants nearly as much, nor have we seen the conferences really coming back either. And I'll pause there. I think I saw a couple of questions.
Okay, go ahead first, Mr. Trombley.
Hey, Jack. So I meet with BOMA about every other month, Building Owners and Managers Association, and they were curious about the land assessments. Excuse me. And could you maybe you addressed it, but they were curious why the land value increases even though the structure on top of it decreases, and I just didn't have an answer for them. I mean, I understand land is limited, but is that the reason?
Well, I think partly some of it is that we've been close to watching the market as much as we can. There's just such limited data when it comes to just a true raw land sale, and so analyzing the limited sales that we had over the last couple of years, we really, at the end of the day, have been saying, well, actually, sure, maybe the value of this property is $1 million, but maybe actually more of that $1 million, the land is really the bulk of where that value is. The other thing to keep in mind too is that we do have an aging infrastructure with respect to some of the commercial. So these buildings, if you're not building it new, the building itself is going to be depreciating. Sure.
And then just a quick follow-up. So when you say land, I heard you reference vacant land. But obviously, like and I don't own any commercial property, but I'm assuming it's the same for residential. When I look at my land is assessed at one and then my structure is assessed at another. Does that land, is that just vacant or does that reflect the land that the building's sitting on too?
Yeah, and sorry if I was being confusing there. Your land is all land, right?
Okay.
So we value as if vacant the land. But at the end of the day, you're right. So if 1.6% means it's going to be for vacant and or if you have a building on it.
Okay, thank you. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Anything else?
Nothing else from me, no, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Weddleton.
Yeah, I guess following up on that, so on, I was distracted for a moment, so maybe you answered this, but on page 14, it said vacant land up 0.1%, and then on page 19, land up 1.6%, but you said they're all valued together, so what's the difference there?
Yeah, so I think it really the property type there, vacant land, really should also should be what the land is in just land. So land is up 0.1%. But generally, when you're looking at this table here, while a single family home does have land on there, we put it in the single family home bin for that. So really at the end of the day, if you have a single family home, your overall total value is up about on average 8.6%. A small fraction of mostly the improved component went up. The land component went up slightly at 0.1%, for example. But hypothetically, if I'm a property owner and I own vacant land, on average, vacant land went up 0.1%. So it's kind of how we put it in buckets. Hopefully that doesn't muddy the water with respect to what we did. But residential, overall, on average, we increased land 0.1%. When we look at commercial, overall, on average, we increased commercial land by 1.6%.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I missed that. That's commercial. Thanks.
All right, I
Anything
don't see
else?
anyone else. Go ahead, let's move forward.
Okay, thank you. Here we're looking at the commercial property sales. So this is looking from 2019 through 2021. We had a total of 352 352 sales, and about almost 30% of those were disclosed to us at 94. With that 95, almost knocking on the door of 96% ratio. Again, we're a non-disclosure state, so we don't know 100% of those sales. Personal property, as I mentioned, this will be working with the tax year 2021 data. It's comprised of various things, including inventory, machinery, equipment, airplanes, special purpose property. At the right there, you can see there's a picture of a mobile home. Again, mobile homes that are personally owned that reside on their mobile home court will be exempt coming 2022. But when you look at personal property spanning 1980 all the way to 2021, this is nominal dollars here, so not adjusted for inflation. You can see that personal property was down pretty significantly, a little over 6%. So a couple things for that. One is we had one particular large taxpayer that did have a significant decrease as they just got rid of a lot of assets. Another reason is that we did have a lot of companies just have less inventory. They just held less inventory overall. When you look at personal property a little bit more in detail, business by far account for over 90% of that value. Again, oil and gas is about 5%, and that mobile home about 3% when you include the late and timely. So moving on into the review and appeal period, what will be coming here very soon is the appeal season. So number of appeals, you're looking at that in the red here. So spanning 2004 to 2021, you can see the number of appeals actually reduced last year. So this is last year's appeals. We don't know what this year will be. But 2020, we had 383. In 2021, that went slightly down at 366. The blue there, we did have an uptick in the number of corrected assessments for a couple of reasons. One, we were just trying to be really proactive last year and having anybody come in early during the informal review period, and we did take care of a lot of property owners without having them to file an actual appeal. So that 366 appeals that happened last year, what happened with that? Overall, overwhelming majority of those, 70%, so 257 of those, were settled without the property owner and us having to go to the Board of Equalization. The 3% there, those either withdrew within 7 days of the hearing, or they failed to appear at the Board of Equalization. And generally, we try to get that one relatively low for a small sliver. And then finally, the Board of Equalization. So 27% or 97 appeals were heard by the Board of Equalization. Of that 97, about 60% of those were reduced by us prior to the hearing. So one of the reasons why I like this slide, it shows that we often try not to dig in our heels with property owners, and I think that this slide really does show that. On the final bullet point, overwhelming majority of those 97 appeals were upheld by the Board of Equalization. But moving forward, so like I said, that was last year. We need your help. We, as in the Board of Equalization, need your help to help solicit and get more members for the Board of Equalization. Last year, there were 9 members, and there were a couple of those that were really the bread and butter, listening to a lot of those appeals. And so we really appreciate that, not just from property appraisal's perspective, but just from the community perspective in that. And so the board does need your help to get more members for 2022. And I see that there's a question
just
there.
Putting myself in there to say, as I understand it, a number of eligible applicants have submitted through the on-base system requesting appointment, and we are waiting action from the administration. And so while help is needed from members of the assembly and our supporters to get members on this Board of Adjustment, right now the help is needed from the administration to forward those nominations for confirmation.
Okay, is there anything I can do for that, or is that something that
That's a great question, and the answer, of course, is yes. Anything you can do on the other side of the wall to move it forward would be helpful.
Okay, I can talk to, unfortunately, Mr. Frisk is unavailable today as he had a last minute issue with his something with his tooth. So that was very unfortunate. He called me right before, but I will talk to him about that. We can see where we can go from there. So in summary here for 2022, total value again up 4.5%. The commercial was the softening of almost 2% at 1.9. The existing residential up significantly 8.3%. Personal property, like I talked about, we won't know until later this year. The new construction up almost 30%. Exemptions were up, but not nearly what the overall total value was of 1.4%, which that does bring us to a total taxable value up this year of 5.1%. So what will be coming next? This will be where we'll get our valuation, or many people call it the green card. They will be sent out January 12th, and the deadline to appeal would be February 11th. So if you do have any questions that your constituents on their assessed value, one of the best things I can always say is tell them to call our number 343-6500. Call us earlier the better, as that 30-day informal review period before the February 11th timeline, we can often resolve many appeals. Or I should say, resolve many questions and issues, and without even having to file an appeal. So again, earlier the better. The backside of this green card also does have a lot of good information, so always very helpful to refer constituents back to that. With that, I just want to say thank you so much. Again, 343-6500 is our appeal phone line.
Okay, anyone have questions for Mr. Gadamus? I'm not seeing anybody put themselves in the queue at this time. You know, Jack, there's always questions about how the team goes about gathering information, and I understand it's a pretty complex process, and I want to say thank you to everybody who's involved in that. And I know it's difficult in a non-disclosure state, but that is how it is. So thank you. And if there's nothing else, oh, Mr. Peterson puts himself in the queue. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to thank Mr. Gadamus for all of his years of good work for the municipality of Anchorage. We're sorry to see you go, and I wish you lots of luck in the future. And we appreciate you working right to the very end to try to see the new system be installed and working correctly. So thanks for all you've done for us. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Yes, thank you, Jack. Anyone else? Hearing and seeing none, I guess 12 minutes early, we'll be concluding this work session. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the nice positive comments as well. And yes, I will be expecting to come back, do consulting for a few months to see the project off. And I really do believe in the project. I think it'll be a great benefit to the municipality of Anchorage. And so thank you for giving me the opportunity.
All right. Cheers, everybody, and Happy New Year.